The night my daughter-in-law believed I had vanished into the Atlantic Ocean was supposed to be the end of my story, but it turned out to be the beginning of hers. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I am 72 years old, and for most of my life people assumed they understood exactly who I was. A quiet widow, the polite face of the Whitmore shipping fortune, the woman who hosted charity dinners and remembered everyone's birthday. What they never understood was that silence is not weakness, and patience can be the most dangerous quality a person possesses. The evening it all began. Our family yacht floated just off the coast of Monaco, the water smooth as polished glass and the lights of the harbor glowing like scattered gold across the horizon. My son Daniel stood near the upper deck railing speaking on his phone about an upcoming board meeting, while his wife Olivia moved through the cabin with the effortless confidence of someone who already believed the future belonged to her. Olivia had been part of our family for 6 years, long enough to learn our routines, our habits, and the complicated structure of the company my late husband had built from a single cargo vessel into a $3 billion international shipping empire. To most outsiders she appeared charming, intelligent, and devoted to Daniel, but there was always something in her eyes that reminded me of a chess player studying the board several moves ahead. Earlier that afternoon she had insisted we celebrate the company's upcoming expansion, raising a glass of champagne, and smiling as if the evening were nothing more than a family vacation under Mediterranean stars. I remember noticing small details that now seem obvious in hindsight. The way she watched me sign a few routine documents, the way she casually asked whether I ever considered retiring completely from the company, the way Daniel avoided my gaze whenever the conversation turned toward inheritance or future leadership. At the time I told myself I was imagining things, that grief after my husband's passing had made me overly suspicious, yet a quiet instinct deep inside me kept whispering that something about the night felt carefully arranged. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and diesel from distant ships moving through the harbor lanes, and the deck lights reflected in the dark water below like a mirror that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Olivia eventually joined me near the rail, resting her elbows lightly against the polished wood as if we were simply two women enjoying the view. Her voice was calm when she spoke about the future of the company, about how quickly industries change and how important it is for the right generation to take control at the right time. I listened without interrupting, studying the reflection of the yacht lights trembling across the surface of the ocean while the engines hummed quietly beneath our feet. In that moment Olivia believed she was watching the final chapter of my life unfold, a chapter that would clear the path to wealth, authority, and the legacy she believed should belong to her. What she did not know was that long before that night on the water, I had learned an important rule about power. The person who appears calmest in a moment of uncertainty is usually the one who already knows how the story will end. The morning before that quiet night on the Mediterranean began like so many others in the Whitmore household, with sunlight filtering through the tall windows of the coastal villa we used whenever business brought us to Monaco. I woke early, as I always do, long before the rest of the house stirred, and walked slowly through the kitchen while the coffee machine hummed softly on the marble counter. For years I had followed the same morning ritual, reading financial reports while the world outside remained calm and still. But that particular morning something felt slightly different, the kind of subtle shift a person notices without immediately understanding why. My late husband, Thomas Whitmore, used to say that business instincts rarely arrive with noise or drama. Instead, they appear quietly, like a faint ripple in still water. As I sat at the long breakfast table reviewing documents from our shipping division, I noticed that several authorization requests had already been approved before reaching my office. That had never happened before. For more than 3 decades, the Whitmore Company followed a simple rule. Nothing moved without the final signature of the founder or his successor. After Thomas passed away 2 years earlier, that responsibility had become mine. Yet the paperwork in front of me suggested that someone had been slowly rearranging the structure of our financial approvals. The changes were subtle. No large transfers. No missing funds. Just small adjustments that would allow certain decisions to move forward without my direct involvement. I poured another cup of coffee and studied the names attached to the authorization logs. One name appeared repeatedly beside new approval routes and updated access permissions. Olivia Whitmore. Technically, her position as Daniel's spouse gave her limited administrative access to some company planning documents, but she had never held executive authority, at least not officially. I told myself that perhaps Daniel had simply allowed her to assist with routine coordination, yet the pattern felt too deliberate to be accidental. Later that morning, Olivia entered the dining room wearing a white linen jacket and a bright smile that appeared perfectly natural to anyone who did not know her well. She greeted me warmly and asked if I had slept well, then mentioned that Daniel was preparing a presentation about expanding our cargo operations into 3 new Atlantic routes. Her tone was light, almost casual, but she watched me closely while I responded. It was the same careful attention I had noticed during the past few months whenever conversations turned toward leadership, inheritance, or the future direction of the company. After breakfast, she suggested that the 3 of us take the yacht out that evening to celebrate the upcoming expansion. She described it as a small family moment before the next board meeting changed everything. At the time, I simply nodded and agreed. From the outside, it must have looked like a peaceful morning in a successful American family enjoying a Mediterranean summer. What none of them realized was that while Olivia believed she had quietly begun rewriting the rules of our company, I had already begun asking very quiet questions of my own. By the time the sun began lowering behind the pale stone buildings of Monaco that afternoon, the villa had grown unusually quiet. Daniel had left earlier to take a call with investors in New York, which meant the house staff moved through the halls with soft footsteps and lowered voices. I spent most of the afternoon in the small study that overlooked the harbor, reviewing company reports while cargo ships moved slowly across the distant water like patient giants returning home. The Whitmore Shipping Group had taken more than 40 years to build, beginning with a single second-hand freighter my husband purchased in Baltimore when Daniel was still a child. I remembered the early years clearly, the long nights Thomas spent studying shipping contracts and fuel prices while I balanced ledgers at the kitchen table. Success did not arrive quickly, but it arrived steadily. And by the time our company expanded across the Atlantic routes, we had become one of the most reliable cargo operations in the industry. That kind of legacy does not change hands lightly, which was why the quiet adjustments I had discovered that morning continued to linger in my mind. Late in the afternoon, I received a short message from Lucas Bennett, the attorney who had handled our family trust for nearly 20 years. Lucas was not the type of man who sent unnecessary messages. His note was simple, asking whether I had personally authorized a new financial access layer within the executive trust accounts. I wrote back that I had not. Several minutes passed before his reply appeared. The update had been submitted through internal credentials connected to Daniel's executive office. That information alone might not have meant much, but Lucas added something else that caught my attention. The request had been processed during a late evening hour when Daniel had been attending a charity event across town. I closed the laptop slowly and looked out toward the harbor again. For many people, the ocean feels peaceful, but anyone who has spent decades in shipping understands something different about water. Beneath a calm surface, there are always powerful currents moving quietly in directions most people never notice. When Olivia returned to the villa later that afternoon, she appeared relaxed, almost cheerful, as if the evening ahead were nothing more than a pleasant family outing. She spoke enthusiastically about the yacht, describing the sunset views we would see once we moved beyond the harbor lights. Daniel arrived shortly afterward and greeted me with the distracted warmth of someone who had spent the day thinking about numbers and contracts rather than family conversations. If either of them suspected that I had begun quietly examining the company's internal changes, they gave no sign of it. As the 3 of us prepared to leave for the marina, I paused for a moment beside the framed photograph that still sat on the hallway table. It showed Thomas Whitmore standing proudly on the deck of our very first cargo vessel nearly 40 years earlier, the wind pushing against his coat while he smiled directly into the camera. My husband had always believed that the greatest danger to any successful company was not competition from outside, but ambition from within. That memory followed me all the way to the yacht that evening, long before the lights of Monaco faded behind us, and the open water began stretching quietly toward the horizon. The marina lights faded behind us as the yacht moved slowly beyond the harbor, leaving the quiet glow of Monaco shimmering across the water like a distant constellation. The engines ran smoothly beneath the deck, their steady rhythm blending with the soft rush of evening wind that carried the cool scent of salt across the open sea. I had always loved that sound. For decades, it reminded me of the early years when Thomas and I traveled between ports to inspect new vessels and negotiate shipping contracts. The ocean never rushed anyone. It simply waited, patient and endless, the same way successful businesses were built one careful decision at a time. Daniel stood near the helm speaking with the captain about navigation, while Olivia poured 3 glasses of champagne at the small teak table behind the upper deck lounge. Her movements were confident and unhurried, as if she had rehearsed the evening in her mind long before we stepped onto the yacht. When she handed me the glass, she smiled warmly, her expression soft enough that most people would have believed every word she spoke. She began talking about the company again, about how the next generation of global shipping would require bold leadership and modern thinking. According to Olivia, the world was changing faster than many older executives understood. International trade routes were shifting. Energy costs were unpredictable. Younger leadership, she explained, would be essential for the company to remain competitive. I listened quietly while the yacht continued moving farther from the coast, watching the harbor lights shrink into small golden reflections across the darkening water. Daniel eventually joined us, leaning casually against the railing with the relaxed posture he often used during family conversations that he did not want to take too seriously. Olivia continued speaking as if she were presenting an idea to a boardroom rather than enjoying a private family evening at sea. She mentioned succession planning. She mentioned modern leadership structures. And then she asked a question that seemed innocent on the surface but carried a very specific direction beneath it. Had I ever considered stepping away from daily control of the company entirely so that Daniel and Olivia could guide Whitmore Shipping into the future together? I remember studying the calm surface of the ocean before answering. There was no anger in her voice, no hostility, only the confident tone of someone who believed the decision had already been made somewhere ahead of time. I explained that leadership transitions in companies like ours required patience and careful preparation. Generations did not replace each other overnight. Olivia nodded politely, though her eyes revealed a flicker of impatience that disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. For several minutes, none of us spoke. The yacht drifted steadily across the dark water, while the wind pressed gently against the railings, and the sky above us slowly filled with stars. From a distance, it must have looked like a peaceful family celebration under the Mediterranean night. Yet something about the silence felt deliberate, as if the evening itself were quietly moving toward a moment that had already been planned. I set my champagne glass on the table and walked toward the outer railing to watch the waves slide quietly past the hull. Behind me, I could hear Olivia's footsteps approach across the polished deck, light and measured, the way someone walks when they believe the next move in a long game is finally about to begin. Olivia stopped beside me at the railing, resting her hands lightly on the polished wood while the yacht continued gliding across the calm Mediterranean water. For a moment, she did not speak. The only sounds were the low hum of the engines and the steady rhythm of waves brushing along the hull. From where we stood, the coast of Monaco looked distant and quiet, its lights scattered across the shoreline like a thin necklace of gold against the dark horizon. It was the kind of view that made people feel small in the best possible way, the kind of night that reminded you how wide the world really was. Olivia studied the water for a few seconds before finally breaking the silence. She said that running a company like Whitmore Shipping required courage, and that sometimes difficult decisions had to be made for the sake of the future. Her voice was calm and almost reflective, the way someone speaks when they believe the outcome of a conversation has already been decided. I listened without interrupting. Over the years, I had learned that the most revealing moments in business often arrived when people believed they were speaking freely. Olivia continued explaining how Daniel and she had spent months discussing the direction of the company, studying industry projections, analyzing market shifts across the Atlantic routes, and planning a leadership structure that would allow them to move faster than traditional boards usually allowed. She spoke confidently about innovation, about generational change, and about the importance of removing obstacles that slowed progress. When she finished, she turned slightly and looked directly at me, waiting for my reaction as the wind lifted a few strands of her hair across her face. I remember noticing how steady her expression was. It was not the look of someone making a suggestion. It was the look of someone announcing a conclusion. Behind us, Daniel remained near the upper deck seating area, scrolling through messages on his phone with the distracted focus he often showed when he wanted to avoid stepping into a complicated family discussion. The yacht continued drifting farther from shore, the water stretching dark and quiet in every direction. I placed both hands on the railing and watched the waves slide past beneath us. For most of my life, I had believed that loyalty within a family was stronger than ambition. Thomas used to say that people reveal their true character when they believe no one is paying attention. On that deck, under a sky filled with quiet stars, I realized Olivia believed exactly that. She believed the night belonged entirely to her plan. The wind grew slightly stronger, and the yacht adjusted its course with a gentle shift beneath our feet. Olivia leaned closer to the railing beside me and spoke again, her voice softer now, almost sympathetic, as if she were explaining a practical truth rather than declaring a decision. According to her, companies that survived decades had to evolve beyond the generation that created them. She said it was time for Whitmore Shipping to belong to the people who would guide it through the next 50 years. I nodded slowly, still looking at the water while the engines carried us deeper into the open sea. What Olivia did not realize was that while she believed this evening represented the final step of her plan, I had already begun. Noticing something else entirely. People who move too quickly toward power often forget that the quietest person in the room may already understand the entire game. The wind moved steadily across the open water as the yacht continued its slow path through the Mediterranean night, and for several seconds neither Olivia nor I spoke again. The silence between us was not uncomfortable, but it carried a weight that felt deliberate, as though both of us understood that the conversation had reached a quiet turning point. I could sense her studying my expression, searching for any sign that her words had unsettled me, yet I kept my gaze fixed on the dark surface of the ocean stretching far beyond the railing. Years earlier, my husband had once told me that negotiations were rarely decided by the loudest voice in the room. They were decided by the person who remained calm, while everyone else expected a reaction. Behind us, the soft glow of deck lights cast long reflections across the polished floor, while Daniel finally placed his phone down and walked a few steps closer, though he still kept a careful distance from the conversation. I wondered briefly whether he fully understood what Olivia was trying to accomplish that night, or whether he had simply allowed himself to follow her confidence the way many people follow certainty when they feel unsure about their own decisions. Olivia eventually spoke again, this time with a slightly different tone, one that carried a quiet sense of finality. She explained that the company documents Daniel had been reviewing during the past few months were designed to simplify the transition of leadership so that Whitmore Shipping could move forward without unnecessary delays. According to her, investors respected clear direction, and markets rewarded companies that acted decisively rather than cautiously. She said the future of global shipping would belong to leaders willing to take control rather than protect traditions that belong to another era. I listened carefully to every word while the yacht engines continued their low, steady rhythm beneath the deck. The ocean around us remained calm, but the night air had grown cooler, and the distant lights of Monaco were now barely visible along the horizon behind us. I rested my hands against the railing and considered how strange it was that Olivia believed this moment would reshape the entire future of our company. For more than 40 years, Whitmore Shipping had survived economic crashes, fuel shortages, labor strikes, and fierce international competition. It had endured because every major decision had been made with patience rather than impulse. Yet Olivia spoke as if the company were a chess piece waiting for a single clever move. When she finished explaining her vision, she looked directly at me again, waiting for the response she clearly expected. I turned slightly toward her and allowed a small, thoughtful smile to appear, the kind of calm expression that had often unsettled business partners who assumed they had already predicted my answer. The ocean breeze brushed across the deck while the yacht moved quietly through the darkness, and I realized that Olivia believed the evening had already reached its conclusion. What she did not understand was that the most important part of any long strategy is not the moment someone believes they have won. The most important part is what happens after that moment, when the person who appeared silent finally begins to act. The night air had grown cooler as the yacht moved farther into open water, and the quiet hum of the engines seemed louder now that the conversation had slowed. I could feel Olivia watching me carefully, waiting for the moment when I would finally react the way she expected. For several seconds I said nothing at all. Instead, I continued looking out across the dark surface of the Mediterranean while the waves passed quietly beneath the hull. The ocean has always been an honest teacher. It reminds people that calm surfaces can hide powerful forces moving below. I turned slightly toward Olivia and asked her a simple question. How long had she been planning this transition she spoke about so confidently? She paused for a moment, clearly surprised that I had not responded with concern or resistance. Then she smiled again and explained that thoughtful leaders always prepare early for the future. According to her, the discussions between her and Daniel had begun months ago while reviewing the company's long-term expansion strategy. She spoke about market forecasts and generational leadership as if she were giving a presentation to a room full of investors. Her voice remained steady and controlled, but there was a brightness in her eyes that revealed something deeper than simple ambition. It was the look of someone who believed they had already secured victory. Behind us, Daniel shifted his weight uneasily, glancing between the two of us as though he sensed the conversation had moved beyond the comfortable boundaries of a family discussion. The yacht continued forward through the open sea while the distant coastline faded almost completely into darkness. Olivia leaned one hand on the railing and lowered her voice slightly, as if sharing a practical truth that could no longer be avoided. She said that companies do not belong to memories or traditions. They belong to the people who are prepared to lead them forward. According to her, it would be easier for everyone if leadership simply passed to those ready to guide the next era. I listened carefully while the wind moved softly across the deck and the night sky stretched wide above us. For a long time, I had wondered whether Daniel truly understood the depth of responsibility tied to the company his father created. Looking at him now, I saw hesitation in his expression, the quiet uncertainty of someone who had allowed another person to shape the direction of events. Olivia, however, appeared completely certain. She looked at me again, her gaze steady and expectant, clearly waiting for the moment when I would accept the future she believed she had already arranged. I rested both hands on the railing and allowed a thoughtful silence to settle between us. What Olivia did not realize was that the calm she interpreted as acceptance was something else entirely. Over the years, I had learned that when someone believes the outcome of a long game has already been secured, they often stop paying attention to the quiet details that still remain in motion. And on that quiet stretch of water, with the engines carrying us steadily through the dark Mediterranean night, many of those quiet details were already beginning to move. For a long moment after Olivia finished speaking, the only sound on the deck was the steady movement of water along the hull as the yacht continued forward through the dark Mediterranean. The night sky above us had grown deeper and clearer, scattered with stars that reflected faintly across the surface of the sea. I could feel both of them watching me now. Olivia with quiet expectation, and Daniel with the uneasy curiosity of someone who was beginning to realize the conversation had reached a place he could no longer avoid. I rested my hands on the railing and allowed the silence to stretch a little longer. Over the years, I had discovered that people who believe they controlled a situation often filled silence with their own assumptions. Olivia clearly believed my quiet meant hesitation. She stepped slightly closer, her voice gentle but firm as she continued explaining that the changes she and Daniel had prepared were designed to protect the company from uncertainty. According to her, investors valued clear leadership and a decisive future. A smooth transition would reassure the board, stabilize the markets, and position Whitmore Shipping for its next expansion across international trade routes. The confidence in her voice was almost impressive. It was the kind of certainty many young executives mistake for strategy. I turned my head slowly and looked from Olivia to Daniel. My son avoided my eyes for a moment before finally meeting my gaze, his expression carrying the complicated mixture of loyalty, doubt, and quiet pressure that often appears when family and ambition begin to overlap. For an instant, I remembered him as a boy standing beside his father on the deck of our first cargo vessel, asking questions about engines and shipping lanes while the wind pushed against his jacket. That memory passed quickly, replaced by the man standing in front of me now, unsure whether he had already stepped too far into someone else's plan. Olivia, however, remained completely composed. She believed the evening had unfolded exactly the way she intended. She looked out across the open water again and spoke with the calm confidence of someone describing an inevitable future. According to her, the company had reached a point where decisive leadership was no longer optional. It was necessary. Traditions were valuable, she said, but progress required bold action. The yacht continued moving steadily forward while the wind brushed softly against the deck lights behind us. I studied Olivia's expression carefully, noticing the quiet satisfaction that appeared whenever she spoke about the future she believed she had already secured. People often reveal more through confidence than through caution. I straightened slightly and took a slow breath of the cool ocean air. The night remained calm and endless around us, the kind of stillness that made every word carry a little farther across the deck. What Olivia did not understand was that while she believed the conversation had reached its conclusion, I had already reached a decision of my own. And decisions made quietly often travel much farther than people expect. The silence that followed settled over the deck like a thin layer of mist, quiet and steady, while the yacht continued its calm path through the open Mediterranean. The wind carried the faint scent of salt across the water, and the distant glow of Monaco had almost completely disappeared behind us. For a few seconds, I simply looked out across the dark horizon, letting the quiet stretch between the three of us. Olivia stood beside me with the confident stillness of someone who believed the future had already turned in her favor. Daniel remained several steps behind us, his hands resting uncertainly against the railing as though he could feel the weight of the moment but did not know how to step away from it. I finally turned toward Olivia and studied her expression carefully. Confidence can be a powerful thing, especially when someone believes they have already reached the final move of a long strategy. Olivia's voice had grown quiet now, patient, almost reassuring, as if she were waiting for me to acknowledge the conclusion she had described so clearly. According to her vision, the company would soon enter a new era, one guided by bold decisions and modern leadership. She spoke about growth, about opportunity, about how every great enterprise eventually passes from one generation to the next. The certainty in her tone was almost admirable. I listened without interruption and nodded slowly, allowing the calm expression that had unsettled many competitors over the years to remain on my face. The engines beneath the deck continued their steady rhythm while the waves moved quietly past the hull. For a moment, none of us spoke again. Then I rested my hands lightly on the railing and looked back toward the water, the way I often did when considering an important decision. My husband used to say that the ocean teaches patience better than any boardroom ever could. It moves slowly, steadily, shaping the world one tide at a time. I thought about the years Thomas and I spent building Whitmore Shipping from a single cargo vessel into an international fleet, about the countless decisions that required calm judgment rather than quick ambition. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm and measured, the same tone I had used in negotiations that lasted long into the night across conference tables around the world. I told Olivia that leadership is never defined by who claims it first. It is defined by who understands the full weight of what they are claiming. Daniel lifted his head slightly when he heard those words, and for the first time that evening I saw uncertainty cross Olivia's expression. It was brief, but it was there. The yacht continued forward across the dark water, while the stars above us reflected softly across the sea. What Olivia believed was the end of a carefully planned future had only just begun to reveal something much larger. Because in business, and in family, the most dangerous mistake a person can make is assuming the quietest voice has nothing left to say.